to our weekly 30-minute webinar here. My name is Dre. I'm with Verify. Today I'm joined by Brian McKay, another systems engineer over here at Verify.
Good
Quite
morning,
certain you
everybody.
guys, yeah, I'm quite certain you guys have heard his voice on here. How you doing, Brian?
Good. How's it doing today?
Not too bad, hanging in there.
Good.
All right, before we get started here, we'd like to mention that we're actually looking for additional candidates to join our Verify Cloud EFT beta, which is currently in EFT3. So if there's any interest to you, please let us know. You can contact us beta@verify.com or cloud@verify.com, or you can email your account manager or one of the systems engineers. All right, so for today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on using and troubleshooting remote phone control.
That's right.
All
And
right. We're going to start off. Yeah, so we're going to start off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. We'll jump to a live demo where Brian will walk us through some remote phone control and troubleshooting. We'll pause for Q&A and get some of your questions answered. During the demo, if you have any questions, please make sure to ask them in the Q&A panel, the bottom right hand of the screen. And after Q&A, we will reward one lucky attendee with a $50 Amazon gift card. So hang around to see if you won. All right, a quick overview of Verify. Verify is the preferred analytics and management solution for Cisco collaboration. We provide industry-leading CDR reporting and call analytics, customizable dashboards, widgets, UCCX reporting, remote phone control, change management. But today, as I said earlier, we're going to be focusing on the remote phone control aspect. If you have any questions on any of our other features, we can most definitely take them offline and get those answered for you. And also, before we get started, we want to announce that Verify now offers a new service that provides managed consulting services to our customers. Verify's SE team will be engaged on a one-on-one basis to remotely provide additional consulting, unassisted reporting, dashboarding configuration, and system monitoring assistance. This is a service that provides dedicated Verify SE to do the heavy lifting of report creation and generation. For more information, please contact us, and we'll be glad to speak more in depth about our new service offering. All right, let's get into the demo. Brian, get us started. I'll pass you the ball, sir.
all right.
And so far all right, get WebEx back up here. Sorry about that. All right, you should have the ball now, sir.
Okay, let me share my desktop. And you guys should be seeing my screens coming up here.
Yes, sir, we see it.
All right, so yeah, I'm just going to give a quick overview of phone control, basically how to use it, how to configure it on the call manager side, and things you can check to troubleshoot if it's not working for some reason. There's a fair amount of moving parts, so there's quite a few things that can potentially go wrong. Usually, we can track them down pretty quickly, and it's a pretty quick fix. Occasionally, though, it might get a little hairier if there's problems with the authentication URL, specifically the secure authentication URL on the Cisco side. But let's just start at the beginning. Just for your knowledge, there is some good documentation on our knowledge base about phone control. We have this general phone control FAQ. Let me move this out of the way. It shows what phone models are compatible with phone control. There are certain models that aren't. Specifically like the conference room models that don't have screens, or some of the video phones are not compatible with phone control, just because it's really difficult to pull a screenshot from them because of the size of the screenshot format. They use bitmap formats. Their screenshots are pretty big, and it's kind of unreliable pulling screenshots. But most models are fully supported with phone control. Basically, there's some pre-config involved on the call manager side. You have to set up an application user, make sure all the SCP devices are added to the control device list, and make sure that the web access is enabled on the phones. You may also need to enable the HTTP or HTTPS authentication settings. Some of the phones don't have that in the properties. They just do it automatically, but some of the older models have a separate flag, and I'll show you where that is. But that's pretty much it for the most part for the setup. It's pretty easy to set it up on the call manager side. And then we also have this troubleshooting guide, which walks you through various steps. You can check if the phone control is not working. You'll probably get a message like this if it's not working. It'll give you the red in verifying site encountered a problem. It may give you a hint what to check. Like the phone may not be currently registered. Phone not appearing on the network, or it may say something like, the password does not appear to be correct. Please check your authentication. It'll kind of give you a clue where to go to check, but this document will walk you through a lot of the more common things that cause phone control to fail. And sometimes it's easier to track down on others. Like if all the phones aren't working, it's usually something global that we can identify and fix pretty quick. If most of the phones are working, but specific phones aren't, you may have to isolate, are these phones on a specific site that's different from the rest? Is there possible firewall issues going on that's affecting those phones as opposed to all the other phones that are working, things like that. So, sometimes we have to kind of dig into the weeds a little to try and figure out what's going on. But this is a pretty good document. I wrote this myself years ago, it feels like, and it's been updated over the years. So there's a lot of good things you can check. But of course, if you don't have time to mess with that, you can always just contact us at support@verify.com, and we'll be happy to assist you as soon as possible. So let's take a look at the phone control. I've got a couple phones up here that I just pulled up. So basically, this is what it looks like in our application. It's just a web interface to the phone, and it uses the web access server on the phone. We don't use CTI for our phone control generally. You can search for controllable phones in here. If you just do device name, contains SEP, that will bring up all the phones in the domain. Or you can, search by description, directory number, etc. There's a bunch of different things you can search by in here. So this will bring up all the phones. It'll show the registration status, if they're on or offline. It'll show the model number, the lines assigned to it, etc. So that's kind of helpful at a glance to see if any phones are possibly not registered or not showing up. You can view recently controlled phones in this tab. Anything you've recently looked at will automatically get added here. You can also do favorite controlled phones. If you have specific phones you access a lot, or you have certain test phones you use a lot that you want to keep handy, you can create a favorite for the phone control there. And you do that by just clicking the star here, and it will add it to the favorite. So I've already added this one. So you basically just click the star, add it to a list. I call this one phone control webinar, update favorites, and it will add it to that list for later access. So that just kind of makes it handy. Now you can view various things in the phone control. And one thing to note, this only works on physical phones, on SCP devices. I guess IP communicators are SCP devices too, but it won't work on IP communicator or Jabber clients or any soft clients. It's only going to work on the physical phones. And that's just, that's just kind of how the Cisco firmware is configured on these for the phone control. You can view various stats. Some of these are pulled directly from the phone themselves. Some of these are pulled from call managers. So for example, the control tab here, this is pulling directly from the phone itself. It's pulling the screen in, close to real time. It's not exactly real time. There's a little bit of a refresh delay. Anytime you click on the screen, it's going to refresh that and just bring it up. So if you click a button or something and you don't see the change right away, you can just click on the screen. It'll update it, and then you'll see that change. So like if we click on settings, for example, and usually it'll come up right away, but if it doesn't, you just click the screen again and it should refresh up, and then you can see the settings menu. Another thing to keep in mind, people do this all the time, and I do it too sometimes. This is not a touch screen, so you can't actually click on redial or new call in the screen. We're so used to touch screens that we tend to do this a lot. And like, it's funny, I tell customers, oh, you can't use that as a touch screen. You have to use the soft key buttons here. And then I end up doing it 20 minutes later. So it's a hard habit to break in a world of touch screens. But basically, all clicking on the screen does is refresh it. That's all it's ever going to do. So you'll need to use the soft key buttons. And there's some other things you can do. Like if you want to dial a number, you could type it out here and just hit dial number. And that will dial the number instead of having to type it one at a time on the touchpad and wait for the screen to refresh each time. You can also do, just a press digit or a DTMF test using the same thing. You can send an unlock sequence when you're in the menu. So if you want to, basically have it press star pound to unlock it, you just hit that and it will do that. You can also set an automatic screen refresh if you want to just leave it up to monitor it. You can tell it to refresh every 5 seconds to 30 seconds. Typically, like I said, if you click a button, it will refresh the screen, but sometimes there may be a little bit of lag, so you may have to manually refresh it or just set it to refresh every 5 seconds. So the controls tab is getting pulled directly from the phone. The device tab is not. This is pulling information from CUCM. So basically, it's just pulling all the property info from the device that's in Call Manager on these. You also have the hardware tab, which will show the firmware version, serial number, model number. That's pretty useful, and I believe it pulls this from the phone directly as well. The lines is pulling from Call Manager again, and you notice you have a hot button here to edit the line config and CUCM administration. If you click on that, it'll take you into Call Manager and take you right to that phone or that line's direct properties page once you log in. But that basically shows all the line info. Network is pulling this from the phone, and it shows some useful information like the neighbor IP address and the port number. So if you want to track down where a phone is connected, what device it's connected to, what port it's on. This makes it a lot easier to track down than trying to trace cables or whatever. You can see the TFTP server information, default router information, authentication URLs. Services, this is where if you have things like mobility extension or things like that, they would show up under here. This doesn't have any. Speed dials, any speed dials that the phone has configured will show up in here. And then call stats is where you can monitor the call quality in real time. So it only really works if the phones are on a call. So like this is showing the most recent voice quality from the last call, I believe. So what we can do just to show how you could monitor that in real time if you have any phones that are where the users are complaining of voice quality issues. You could do a test call between a couple of lines and then monitor those stats in real time. And you can pull a report after the fact for call quality as well in our call reporting feature. But this is just kind of a more real-time way to do it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to call 1000 from here. And refresh the screen, and it should show the phone is ringing. Answer here. All right, so we're on the call. Refresh this one, should show the call is active. All right, so now if we go to call stats, we can take a look at these devices. We can see it refreshes every 7 seconds automatically. So we can see the packet loss, the jitter, MOS score, things like that. So typically, as long as the packet loss is under 10%, and right now it's at 0, so that's perfect. The jitter on this side is a little high. It's 10 milliseconds, but that's okay. That's still within acceptable range. Typically, we don't start seeing voice quality issues until it hits 50 milliseconds or higher. And then the MOS score will periodically update. And you want that to always be above a 4. Anything below like a 4 or maybe a 3.8, you're going to start having noticeable voice quality degradation. If you're at a 4.4 or 4.5, that's pretty much perfect. So this is looking good as far as this call goes. Yeah, other than a little bit of jitter, but still, within acceptable values, this is looking pretty good. So you could use this to monitor a call in real time and check if there's any voice quality issues that you can spot right away. So we'll go ahead and terminate the call. Let that update. Let's do end call here. And then that should be ended as here as well. Okay, so there we go. So that's basically phone control in a nutshell. Pretty useful tool, especially if you have a lot of phones or remote sites and you don't have IT people at those sites and you need to try to access those remotely. It's pretty useful for that. You can also get into the settings menus and look at things. If you want to look at, like the network configuration, for example, you could check what the TFTP server is. You have to use the down arrow, of course, and let it refresh every time. It's a little slow when you're having to scroll with the arrows. But it's better than driving 2 hours to a remote site. So you can do things like, check your network config, check your TFTP. Let's do an unlock sequence, actually, because it's locked, I notice. That should unlock it. It might take a couple of refreshes. Yeah, there we go. Now it's unlocked. Okay, so that's just kind of an example of what you can do. You can also check phone logs directly on the phone. If somebody says they received the call and you don't see it in the call analytics reports, you can check the call logs directly on the phone and see if there is a call that possibly didn't get logged in CUCM for some reason. Now, if phone control is not working for you, there are some things you definitely can check. First thing, let's go look at, let me just pull up one of these devices, 299, let's pull up that one. So let's say this phone wasn't working. The first thing I want to check in here on the phone properties is make sure that web access is enabled. Now this is interesting. It says it's disabled. But it may be actually getting it enabled from the common phone profile settings. So we're not overriding those, so that's fine. And then another thing you may want to check. Let's see. Sometimes this setting needs to be turned on, HTTP and HTTPS enabled. You'd have to enable that with the checkbox. If you're using both secure and non-secure authentication URLs. So the secure one will always override that. And I'll show you that real quick. Actually, that's going to be in enterprise parameters. So if we look in here, we'll see URL authentication. So here's the non-secure one, and here's the secure one. The secure one will always override unless you remove it, and then it will revert to the non-secure one. But if you have both in there, you may need to have that HTTP or HTTPS setting turned on. So those are the first things I check in the phone properties themselves. Another thing we want to check is under application user is if the phone is in the control device list for our app user, which should be, we got a lot of verify ones here. I think, you know what, let me just double check which one we are using for this cluster. So let's open this in another tab. We want to look at Colorado corporate. Okay, so we're using verified dev in this particular cluster. And then under the remote phone control, so there's an option to use either the same login you use above for all the other features, or you can use a separate login. And I'll explain why we may need that in a little bit here. But basically, when you check this, it's going to use the same login that's up here. And that's usually the easiest way to do it. So let's go to verify dev. And one thing I would check, if none of the phones are working with phone control, then I'd probably check the roles and make sure they look okay. So you want to have standard Axle API access, CCM admin users, these CTI roles. Now I said we don't typically use CTI. There is one exception where we use CTI, and that's if we're going to create a macro to delete ITLs. We need to use CTI in that instance. That's kind of a separate discussion outside the scope of this, but yeah, basically we have a macro feature which lets you create a script of button presses, and you can access the phone and have it basically press all the options in the phone for you and go in and delete the ITL file. But typically, if the ITL file is outdated and needs to be deleted in the first place, it's not going to work with web access authentication anyway, so we would need CTI. So that's really the only thing we use CTI for. And then there's one called standard serviceability read-only that we need. So the roles all look correct. Another thing we would check is device association on the control device list. And basically we want to make sure that everything, all the SCP phones are added in here. Now it may add ones like IP communicator ones that we don't, phone control doesn't work with. That's fine, it will just filter those out of the results. But the easiest way is just make sure all the SCP devices are added. And it looks like they are. So you can uncheck this. And if there's any phones that are not associated, they will show up in here after this box is unchecked. And that's the easiest way to find the ones that aren't associated. And then you can just select those, add those, and then refresh this again. It will go back and no, usually it turns this back on. Okay, we'll just turn it back on. Yeah, so you can see that all the devices, we don't have that many devices in our lab cluster, obviously, but one trick that's useful if you have a lot of phones to add, I like to show this to my customers. It only lets you do about 250 pages or 250 rows per page at a time. So let's say you had like 4,000 phones instead of 40, and a couple thousand of them hadn't been added yet. What you can do is you can go up here into the URL, and you'll see at the end of the URL it says rows per page equals 250. You can change that to 2,000 and hit enter. And when it comes back up, it would bring up the top 2,000 results. Obviously, it's still only showing 40 because we only have 40 phones. But if you had 2,000 phones that weren't added, it would show those 2,000 phones in a single list. So that's kind of a useful thing that lets you just add them all at once rather than having to go through doing a block of 250 at a time, because every time it does that block, it kicks you back to the screen, and then you have to go in and select the next block, and it just makes it a little more time consuming. So that just makes things easier. So that all looks good. And those are probably the main things we would want to check and make sure that they are configured properly. That's pretty standard with the phone control stuff. So if some phones are working and others aren't, it's usually one of two things. It's usually the ones that aren't working haven't been added to this control device list, and they need to be added in, or it's possibly that they're on a remote site or VLAN or something that has different firewall settings, and it's not allowing verified to get to the phones for some reason. So if that's something easy to check. If the phones that are affected are all in the same IP range or VLAN or whatever, then yeah, they're not working, and something is probably blocking them at the firewall port level, or it could possibly be a DNS routing issue. And that's another thing we see problems with sometimes, is if you're using a domain, fully qualified domain name for the secure authentication URL instead of IP address, and there's DNS issues, that could cause it to fail as well. So sometimes we'll see, a fully qualified domain name in here, and some of the phones may not be able to connect to that for whatever reason, just need their DNS updated or whatever. So that's something to be aware of as well. Now there's something else we can do on the phones. We can do an override if you wanted to. Let's say that it's using a fully qualified domain name, but you want to actually try it with an IP address as an override to see if it bypasses any DNS problems. You can go back to the phone and go into properties, and there is an override field in here. So you would just put it in the secure authentication. You would save, then apply config, then reset. You have to do all 3 steps every time, unfortunately. So yeah, and then once the phone resets, it should be using this as the secure authentication URL rather than the one with the fully qualified domain name. So that's a good test. Another thing you can test if you're not too leery of doing it is you can go to back to enterprise parameters. And if you suspect there's a problem with secure ports or possibly with even the certificates on Call Manager where it's not accepting the connection, you can also go in and take out the secure authentication URL completely and then save it. You only want to save. You don't want to apply config or anything because that's going to push it to all the phones. But if you just save it, it's not going to affect any of the phones currently unless you reset them. So you could remove this, save it, reset a phone to test it, and that will force it to use the non-secure URL authentication. And if that works, then you know it's a problem with either a secure port or possibly a certificate or something on Call Manager side where it's just not able to get to it. So there's other things you can do. We're kind of running out of time, so I won't hit on everything you can test. There's some other things you can test as well. And one of the other things that we run into that breaks phone control is that the ITL file is out of date and you've got a stale ITL. That's going to prevent secure authentication from happening as well. It won't affect the non-secure, but it will definitely affect secure authentication. Either if the ITL is out of date or if it's not even installed. I ran into that with a customer the other day where some of their phones weren't working with phone control and they didn't have any ITL files installed. So at that point, that's an issue for Cisco TAC to look at why those phones aren't getting their ITLs installed. But that's a fairly common issue as well. So there's some other stuff in that phone control doc that's pretty useful, but like I said, if you just need help right away, you can always just contact us via support@verify.com, and we're happy to jump on as soon as possible on a WebEx and get you sorted out. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Brian, doesn't look like there's any questions in there now. It was pretty thorough. Very good job, man.
Thank you. Sorry, I was going a little fast. I had a lot of ground to cover.
It's a lot to cover there.
It's a lot.
There's a lot that can go on. Like Brian said, also you guys can email us at support@verify.com and it'll open up a ticket for us. So if you guys have any trouble with your remote phone control, please let us know.
Right.
All right. Well, if there's it doesn't look like there's going to be any questions. Let's go ahead and move on to the winner of the $50 Amazon gift card. Let me go ahead and grab control back from you, Mr. Brian.
Yep. Yours.
All right. All right. Today's winner is Dushawn Evans. Congratulations. That $50 Amazon gift card. Your account manager will be getting hold of you soon. We'll get that over to you right away. Well, thank you everyone for stopping by and checking out our webinar on a remote phone control. Don't forget, we do this every Wednesday. And next week we have Automate CUCM, Unity, and UCCX Change Management. So that should be an interesting one. We got Victor Verba and Matt Sykes heading that one over there. So that should be a good one.
Excellent.
Don't forget, we also have a webinar suggestion box on our website. So if there's any topics or scenarios that we haven't covered that you would like to see demonstrated, please drop us a suggestion in the box for us, and that would be a good help. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Bye.